Hey guys, it's finally time to transfer that motor into this car. And to do that, I'm actually going to use this block to mock it up. Let's check it out. Welcome to the Kiefer's Hot Rod Shop YouTube channel. I'm Nick Kiefer. Hey guys, and welcome back. So what I'm working on right now is I'm going to stick the crank in this old 396 block, and funny enough, I disassembled this motor to go take it to the machine shop over a dozen years ago, and it came back and it just ended up sitting around and got a little bit of roof leak on it, I think, and formed some scale. So it just kind of sat around, but I've been working it with some emery paper and WD-40 and clean it all off some brake cleaner, just real simple cleanup, and everything looks good enough at least just to mock it up and put it together. The reason that I'm putting the crank in it, which is what I'm just about to do, is so that I can mock up my harmonic balancer and all my pulleys when I get this thing situated in the car. So had some old bearings sitting around, and now what I'm about to do is go ahead and stick these into the block. Alright, I went ahead and I put the lower bearings to the side. These are the uppers. I'm going to go ahead and stick them in the registers. Normally I'd put a lot more effort into cleaning this kind of stuff, but for this simple mock-up I think this is going to be just fine. Once again, I just kind of cleaned the crank up with some emery paper and WD-40, and it's not too bad, but it could use a good professional polish. But I'm going to put some good assembly lube on it and get everything all together, and hopefully it'll be all right for mocking up in the car. Alright, looking good. Not going to mess with the rear main seal right now. Once again, just simple mock-up. This gives me a good chance to try this stuff out. I've never used this particular assembly lubricant, but I was told by a friend that this is some good stuff. So I'm going to go ahead and cut the very top of that off and put it on the bearings and drop the crank in. This stuff kind of reminds me of the red Comp Cams assembly lubricant, but it's maybe a little thinner. It's pretty hot today, so it might have thinned out a touch compared to on a cooler day, but feels like it's going to be a nice assembly lubricant. It's going to do the job well and stick to all the surfaces. I'm going to go ahead and get the thrust surfaces of this rear bearing as well. Alright, looking good. I love big blocks, but boy are the crankshafts heavy. Sits in there pretty nicely. I'm going to go ahead and put a little extra lubricant on this thrust surface just to make sure the sides of that rear bearing are lubricated. Alright. Oh yeah, that's good. Cool. Everything actually feels pretty decent, just with the crank sitting in there. So let's go ahead and get the caps on. Alright, so doesn't really matter the order that you place the caps on, but I think I'm just going to go ahead and start right in the middle. So I'm going to grab the number 3 cap and I'm going to stick a bearing on there. It's been a little while since I put a motor together. I really like the fact that I don't have to be too attentive to any of the important measurements with this thing. Some folks just throw motors together and they work fine, so I don't know if I'd have that same luck, but it is certainly a luxury to just simply drop it together. Now, there's an F with an arrow, so I assume that that's going to point to the Ford car that is in front of the Chevy car. Now it's going to point to the front. So you go ahead, drop this cap on there. Sits right down in place. Then I've got the original bolts here. I've actually got some ARP Moly lube that I'm going to go ahead and put on them. Just had this stuff sitting around, and I guess you could probably use some 30 weight oil or something like that, but hard to say with the factory stuff. Once again, if this was a serious build, I think I might opt for a different fastener just to make sure I don't have any problems. But the old fasteners before they did torque to yield stuff were pretty nice and reusable, as a matter of fact. One thing that I did make sure to do, and you should definitely make sure to do if you're building a motor, is go ahead and clean all the threads out with the tap. You can use a clean out tap or a regular tap. Just make sure that you're not pushing it through too hard, damaging any threads, but it's good to clean all of the threaded holes in the motor before you assemble it. Alright, got that one in place. Everything still spins, so I guess the bearings are the right size and all that. Just going to go ahead, stick the rest of the caps on, then bolt them down. Started threading these all in by hand and remembered I had this. It's a cool old school tool here. See if I can get it going. Yeah, these threads were just a little cleaner. Go, sweet. I did clean the threads. I went ahead and cleaned the bolts on the wire wheel on the bench grinder. And like I mentioned earlier, I went ahead and ran a tap through all those threads. Now before I get the rear cap bolts too tight, I want to go ahead and set the thrust on these. Alright, so this is something important you want to do when you're putting your thrust bearing in, which in Fords is in the middle and Chevys is in the rear. You want to go ahead, and you could do it either way, but what I'll do is I'll go ahead and push the crank back in the engine, and then I'll push this rear cap forward, kind of wiggle it in a couple places. Don't want to mess it up or anything like that. Work this crank back and forth, making sure it's got clearance, and also making sure that that rear main cap is seated flat. So push the crank against the thrust washer and the block, and I'll push that cap forward so that thrust washer and the cap pushes against the crank. Alright, so now it's time to torque it. Got this nice fancy electronic torque wrench here, and the beauty of these things is if you have a torque spec that requires like a foot-pound measurement and then an angle, this has a gyro in it and it'll sense the angle, and it's kind of important for certain fasteners. But for this, simply just need to tighten it down to 95 foot-pounds. So I'm going to go ahead, start in the middle, work my way out, and then this thing should be nice and tight, except for the crank. That should be free spinning. So let's do it. First, I'm just going to go through and just kind of tighten all these bolts down, you know, about halfway or so. A lot of times for head bolts, you'll actually go through and take them in 3 steps, all of them. For main bolts, I just like to do this so that it's a little easier to torque down evenly. All right, cool. So got them down about 35 or so. Now it's time to go ahead, take them to 95. It's cool, it actually tells you what you actually tighten it down to. Not used to this kind of technology, honestly. Keep waiting for the click to happen. All right, cool. All right, so now that it's bolted in, the most important check, make sure it still spins. This thing is spinning nicely. Of course, it doesn't have that rear main seal, but everything feels good and smooth, so the crank's in properly. Awesome. Another thing you might want to look at is put a dial gauge on the front and just measure front to back play. This has some. I can feel the lubricant kind of dampening it, but I think it's between 5 and 10 thousandths possibly. I'm not that keen on feeling out measurements, but seems fine. Will definitely suit my purposes, so good to go. Awesome. All right, and I heard one of you guys laughing when I said 5 to 10 thousandths without just measuring it, so let's go ahead and look at this dial indicator here. On one side it's like 46.5 thousandths. Push it to the other side and we're at 51. So let's go ahead, I'll put that at 50. There you go, 7 thousandths. If I push it really hard, yeah, 7 thousandths. I think that's within spec. I'll check, but that's looking good. Alright, so while I get this big block all ready to mock up in the Cutlass, I want to show you a system of parts that I'm going to be including in the car, and that's this clear view filter from clearviewfiltration.com. Now, Mike over there is super helpful, outlining a whole system that I'm going to need to properly filter the oil in this engine, and if you look, it's a pretty neat piece. You might have seen some of these types of filters on some really neat fast cars, and the way they work is, if you look down there, there's a mesh beneath this polycarbonate lens here, and if you hook up air pressure to this Schrader valve, it'll push the oil down, revealing that mesh, and you can see if you've got any little engine particles, any glitter in there that might have come loose inside the engine. So this style one actually goes ahead and sends that oil through a cartridge filter, and this is another thing that Mike suggested to me. This is actually a K&N HP 2002 filter. He highly recommended it, and this is just a standard GM V8 or V6 style filter that they use for a long time. Screws right on, so easy to find. In addition to that filter, he's also nice enough to send me this filter replacement and O-ring kit just for future rebuilds. And another part that I bought from him is this block adapter, which sends and receives oil to and from the filter and bolts right up to the block. Now it's really nice. It uses a series of O-rings to seal to the block, and you might also notice these nice dash 12 fittings screwed in there. Well, they also make those. This is a side of their business called Billet Connection, and they make all the fittings for all the system. Let's check out how this fits in the block. All right, so here we are in the oil filter location on the bottom driver's side of this big block Chevy block here. And I've got the adapter from Billet Connection, and one important thing that you're going to want to do if you are installing one of these is make sure this arrow is pointing forward. Another thing you want to do is go ahead, lubricate these O-rings, and go ahead, make sure the original adapter is out of the block if it had one before. And we're just going to set this down in here. The next step is going to be to carefully lubricate these O-rings and make sure they're installed on these two included bolts. The O-rings are included as well. We're going to drop those down into the holes and make sure everything's lined up and ready to be threaded in. Now for this mock-up, I'm just going to cinch this down tight just to hold it in place for now. But there's a ton of really good information in their instruction manual, and you're going to want to check that out. It tells you how to install everything and lubricate everything and set the system up. One more piece of advice that Mike had on installing this system is the use of fittings that have a curved tube for a nice smooth flow pass for that oil, as opposed to fittings that use a hard 90, maybe like a cast portion that's more compact. He said that these will flow better and won't restrict the oil flow. Now that I've got these mocked up in place, you'll see how the oil lines are going to run up the pan rail. You can secure them with like a P-clamp or something like that. And then they're going to go ahead and be sent up to that clear view filter I showed you earlier. Alright, so off camera, I went ahead and made some more room for the engine to go in. Pulled all the brake lines and stuff off. You can see the master cylinder's just sitting here with no lines in it. Got everything out of the way. And now it's just time to go ahead and pull this one apart and get it moved over to here. Now, I've got that other engine here that I'm going to use to mock everything up in there, and I'm actually going to use different cylinder heads than these. But the reason I need to pull this all apart is because I need the oil pan and the transmission off of this assembly. Obviously the blower and all that too. But what I want to do is I want to position that engine in with the stock 200 4R transmission. I only have one of those. It's sitting in this car. On the stock cross member in that car, so that I can establish the position of everything kind of in stock location, which is what my mid plate is made for. I've just got the Nova one and the one for this car stacked together right now. This is made for stock location. I can lower it or raise it a little bit just to mess with that transmission angle, but for this car I just kind of want stock location. So when I mock everything up in this car, I'm also going to use a pair of stock style motor mounts and all that. And then if I need to move it around any from there, I'll be able to with the motor plates, but more than likely I'm just going to keep it real simple and put it in that stock spot. I'll also be building the rear axle with the stock engine offset. So instead of centering it, I'm going to keep that 1/2 inch offset just for steering clearance and really just to simplify everything. No real reason to center the engine in this, especially with a big block. I need room for that steering and all that. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and I think we'll check out a time lapse of me disassembling this. I've got a nice piece of cardboard laid out off camera that I'm going to put all these pieces on, and just to keep them from getting scratched and all that. So let's go ahead and pull this thing apart, put it together in the other car. All right, as easy as that. It's all out. All right, cool. So got this stuff out of the car. Now I'm just gonna go ahead and pull the transmission off so that I can mount it to the other engine, put it in the other car. Then I'll pick the motor up and grab that pan off of there. That's another cool thing about a 204R. It's really not a bad transmission. Apparently there's like another center support bearing in these things or something like that, but also they have the BOP and the Chevrolet bolt pattern on them. Kind of neat. They can be built, I think, even stronger than a 700 R4. There's some specialty guys that do it, but that's not everyone's cup of tea, but it's actually not a bad transmission. There we go. All right, next I'm going to go ahead and pull this nice MOROSO pan off of this engine. I only put this on with a few bolts. I was mocking everything up the first time. All right, looking nice. All right, and to keep this motor sealed up while it sits off to the side, I'm going to go ahead and throw the old pan back on it. Alrighty, looking good. I'm going to grab these mounts off of here and then that should be it. This one is modified to fit the hooker header. If any of you guys are installing any of those, that's pretty much how it needs to be trimmed. Alright, cool. Alright, so let's go ahead and stick this MOROSO pan onto this mock-up motor. This will be the pan that at least I'm planning to run on this build. It's got a nice sump. It's even got a nice trapdoor baffle and this nice windage screen and all that. Kind of a built-in oil collection device in there. If any of you guys are looking for a pan, I highly recommend MOROSO. Frank Thibodeau up there is my contact, and he's always really helpful. All those guys are. Nice pan. Let's go ahead and mock it up on the engine. I'm just going to go ahead and secure this with 4 bolts, just kind of how it was on the other motor there. That's plenty to hold this in place for a mock-up, and it's nice and easy to take apart later. Just don't want to over tighten them too much just to avoid any kind of warpage, but without a gasket being in there, it shouldn't be a problem at all. Once those are finger tight, I want to go ahead and just cinch them down carefully with this gun. Once again, without over tightening anything. All right, that's looking really good. Let's go ahead and put some motor mounts on it. Cool. All right, so gonna go ahead, pull this motor off of the stand here, bolt the transmission to it with the mid plate between the trans and the motor, then go ahead and try to position it in the car. One thing that I wanted to add is the dimensions kind of between where the transmission bolts to the block and where the motor mounts bolt on small block Chevrolets and big block Chevrolets are the same. So you can use the same motor mounts, transmission, and all that kind of stuff. Like the flex plate and starter might be a little different depending on your application, but just to kind of get everything in the car, it's the same stuff. Next, I'm gonna go ahead, mount that transmission up, and let's check it out. I'll put you on a time lapse for that. All right, it's in. That was a ton of work, but finally got it nestled in there and got the transmission cross member in and all that, so cool. Now time to mock everything up. All right, so getting the motor all mocked up here, and one thing that I need to add at this point is a starter. And for that, I'm using this PowerMaster Ultra Torque. I've had really good luck with PowerMaster starters, and this one's really nice. It's compact to clear those headers, and it also comes with mounting hardware and shims. Part number 9400. All right, the PowerMaster starter's mocked in and it's looking nice. It's actually got a couple of different bolt patterns, I guess for the two different GM flex plate sizes. I went ahead and put it on the outside kind of position, just for header planning, so that I can make sure I can clear anything with the header tubes when I get to building those. This thing's looking nice. All the wiring hookups are right here where you can get to them, so that's cool. All right, so now that I've got the block mocked up in the car, the next thing to stack on top of them is the cylinder heads. And for that, I got no less than some AFR 335 24-degree big block Chevy cylinder heads. These are really nice. I spec'd them out with Inconel exhaust valves. They're super high tech. Came really nicely packaged, straight from Valencia, California. And these things are looking awesome. If you need a pair of cylinder heads for your car, call AFR today and get a pair. All right, so even though I'm just mocking this stuff up for right now, I still want to protect that nice, fresh, flat deck surface on the bottom of the cylinder heads. And so I'm going to put this basic pair of Fel-Pro head gaskets down on the block before I install the heads. All right, so you might notice I've already got a couple ARP head studs in place on either side. I'm hoping there's enough room on this side, but I'm going to go ahead and slide the heads onto these studs. I didn't have any dowel pin ring thing sitting around, so unfortunately I'm going to have to line them up with the studs, but that should be okay for this mock-up. Before I stick the blower back on, I'm going to go ahead and install this sensor. This is actually an HiAT sensor from Rife Sensors, Motion Raceworks, and this one is what they call their HiAT. It's especially made for the high intake air temperatures of supercharged and boosted applications. It's got a 1/8 MPT thread on it. Another handy thing about this sensor is it uses the stock Holley GM style connector, and so it'll just plug right in. It will require recalibration in the Holley ECU, but it comes with instructions on how to do that, or you could find them on their website. And I'm just going to go ahead and thread it right into the back of the intake, kind of in the plenum area. And the blower shop said that that should give this a pretty good sampling of the air temperature. So I'm going to go ahead and just thread it right in. Cool. I'll be holding the blower down in place with these special aluminum studs that they include with the blower kit. I'll be honest with you, I'm not sure if they're aluminum just so that if there's a big problem with the backfire they break, just because they wouldn't quite be as strong as the chromoly steel or something like that, or if it's just for expansion rate so that they expand at the same rate, at the same heat with the intake and the blower case. But they definitely want you to run these and not replace them with any kind of a steel stud, and they're super light. They're really cool. These actually, from the blower shop, actually have a hex cut in the top, so you could use a 5/16 wrench to kind of cinch them down, but they thread in by hand nicely. I'm just going to be installing 4 just to mock the blower up, but of course it uses all 8 for the final install. This thread's a little tight, so I'm just running a tap in here. These heads haven't been cleaned for final install yet, so it's okay if some shavings get down onto them, but I just want to keep it at a minimum. That's why I've got my finger under the tap. Perfect. This water neck that was already mounted to the intake here is actually from Mazir. It's a really nice unit. It fits right behind my idler pulley bracket for the blower, and gives me a, it's actually, this fitting can be changed, so you can give it like a 1.25 inch hose barb, I believe. But this is a -20. I want to run an AN20 upper hose just for fast and easy removability. And it looks really cool. But pretty nice unit. You have to buy these pieces separately. It does have an O-ring swivel, which is kind of cool. Really hoping I don't see any leaks out of this thing ever, but hopefully it'll do great. It's got an O-ring on the base as well, and a couple Allen-headed fasteners to hold it on. It's fancy. But now that I've got these studs in, I'm going to go ahead and grab that really heavy blower and set it down on top of this intake, and mock that up next. Alright, next I want to go ahead and install the idler bracket. This goes on with some selectable spacers here, and obviously you have to change the bolts, but with the different spacers you can set these things up for different belt distances from the engine, but also small block, big block, etc., etc. The proper lubricant for the bolts going into the blower is actually a copper anti-seize, from what I've been able to gather. That's what was on all these bolts that I had to remove to install both the belt guard and the idler bracket assemblies. And bolts up like so. I'll go ahead and snug it down. Once again, I'm not torquing this to final spec at this time, just want to mock it up. I'll be taking this apart again. Now the idler pulley itself is kind of another little ingenious invention here. It uses this selectable spacer, which you can get in different lengths to kind of set your standout length. But the real cool part is this nut, which this bolt threads onto. As you can see, it's machined kind of in an oval shape, which just kind of indexes into the slot. Then this bolt threads into that. And this way you can adjust the belt tension back and forth, and then just tighten it down and it holds it in place. Alright, let's go ahead and ease this Holley dual sync distributor down in here. All right, and that's looking sharp. All right, now for the fun part. So we're going to start with a special gasket which has a screen stapled onto it. And that's just to keep any parts of your throttle body or anything like that out of the blower. That's going to go on here. And then next we'll go ahead and install the adapter plate. I'm just going to use a couple of bolts to keep this thing in place for now, but it installs with 6 for the final assembly. 2 on either end and 2 in the middle. Next we'll go ahead and install our 4150 style open arrangement gaskets onto the adapter plate. Then we'll put these babies on there. This is a super neat 4-barrel throttle body from Wilson Manifolds down in Florida. They boast the most flowing 4150 throttle body on the market. It's almost 1300 CFM and it's real sleek looking. Finally, I'll go ahead and top it off with this vintage style scoop from the blower shop. And this thing's looking good. Alright, so I went ahead and put the old Mickey Thompson valve covers on there. I have something special planned for valve covers, so these are only temporary, although they are really cool. I really like the old Mickey Thompsons. But next to go on is this nice timing cover. And to be honest with you, I don't know how to pronounce that. So I always said Melodon. I think it's Melodon or Mylodon, but I've also heard Mylodone. All sorts of pronunciations. So maybe leave in the comments like a phonetic spelling of how you say this. But regardless, nice cast aluminum cover, nice clean machine work. And they even sell timing pointers for specific size harmonic balancers for these too. So cool stuff. I'm gonna go ahead and mount it to the engine. All right, so I'm just gonna be mocking this up. And I'm gonna use 4 of these nice Allen-headed bolts that they include in their installation kit, and they're nice and compact and fit. One thing I was really pleased with, I actually went ahead and mocked this timing cover up on my dart block that I'm going to be using for this engine that will be going in this car, the 540-inch engine that this blower will ultimately sit on. And I bolted this on, and also the ICT billet front motor mount plate, the front plate, and no trimming necessary. Everything fit together nicely, so that's awesome. Really simplifies the process. That is something that I'll be fitting up really soon. Not in this episode, unfortunately, but that's going to be one of the next things, is going ahead and making that front motor mounting plate. And as you can see, I'm going to have to clean these bolt holes out. I don't know about where you're at, but around here, bugs like to find bolt holes and make little nests in there. It's kind of crazy. But this thing's looking really sweet. For a final installation, you're going to want to go ahead and clean out all the holes in your engine. It really is worth it, but for this mock-up, just trying to get away with the minimal preparation. I also have not installed the alignment dowels in the block that kind of guide where this thing goes exactly. Cool, that's looking awesome. All right, and for final effect, I'll go ahead and just drop the belt onto there. I'm not going to be mounting the harmonic balancer or the blower crank pulley or any of the accessories quite yet. What I need to do before that is actually make the front plate to support the block and the chassis. and that's going to be in a later episode. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to cut that out into shape, mount it, and then put all my accessories on there, installing everything and making sure all the pulleys line up with my serpentine system and with the blower. So that'll be coming up, and you'll want to check that out. But right now what I need to do is clean out a pretty good space in my shop, because I've got a really cool project rolling in really soon that you guys are going to want to check out. It's another classic Chevrolet, and it's going to be a really cool project. Hopefully be working on it for a couple weeks to a month, but we all know how projects go. Sometimes they take a little extra. But hope y'all tune in for that. Until then, I really appreciate you guys watching, liking, subscribing, and leaving comments. And we'll see you next time. Until then, take care. Thanks for watching.